Stop blaming ME patients for being ill. That is the government's message to the NHS as they announce a new plan to overhaul care for the illness. An estimated 241,000 people in England suffer from ME, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, including Karen Gordon, who has lived with it since she was 10 and is now totally bedbound, her eyes covered at all times to protect them from the light. We have spoken with her mother, Heather, before, and we will speak to her again in a few minutes. But first, let's speak with Sean O'Neill, who is senior writer for The Times, and his daughter Maeve died from the condition in October 2021. Morning to you, Sean.
Good morning, Asma. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Tell me then about what do you think? You know, you have a different way of looking at yet another set of government plans. Do you think they'll make much of a difference?
Well, I think it's a significant start. I think we're probably the only government in the world that has actually taken this issue on and accepted that people with ME have been stigmatised and dismissed by the medical profession for many, many years. It's been a major problem, a problem which my family has personal experience of. Doctors don't believe in ME by and large. There is a medical orthodoxy that this is a condition that is all in the mind, that somehow it's a psychological condition, and that you need to pull your socks up and push through and things like this. And in the bitter personal experience of hundreds of thousands of people with ME, and I think also with a very similar condition called long COVID, is that this is a physical illness. It needs research and it needs more compassion from medics than has been the case for many decades.
So what are the government asking the NHS to do? What will change?
I think one of the most important thing that it requires change is education in medical colleges and medical schools. Medical students need to be taught about ME, about how if there is no cure, there is no diagnostic test as yet, but there are treatments coming online that can alleviate symptoms, that can manage symptoms. And I think doctors and medical students, in particular the next generation, if you like, will hopefully benefit from a revised programme of education. I mean, I think what's much more difficult is believing that this is necessarily going to happen. You know, I don't know what the budget constraints are on this. I don't know what the people who kind of, I mean, put it this way, there are very powerful, influential people and bodies in the medical profession, and I'm talking about people like the Royal Colleges, who lobby against change and culture change when it comes to ME. And that's a huge hurdle. It's all very well for ministers to say, this will happen and we want this to happen. But there is a strong conservatism, a strong reluctance to accept new thinking on ME within the medical profession.
That's very interesting. Sean, stay there. We'll speak to Heather now. As I said, Heather is the mother of Karen Gordon, who has lived with ME since the age of 10 and is now totally bedbound. Morning to you, Heather.
Good morning.
We've talked to you before about your daughter's care, and I suppose what would be interesting to talk about is your experience of dealing with all the different types, the many different types of medical professionals around your daughter over the last however many decades. What have they been split 50-50, or in terms of people who are understanding and not so understanding, or has it been less than that?
I think overall it's been less than that. There are some people who are knowledgeable and some who are understanding and compassionate, but unfortunately the ones that aren't win out. Our recent experience is the nursing hierarchy. They won't accept the NICE guidelines. They refuse to follow them. They won't listen to anything Karen says or we say. They had her in a bay despite specialist sort of a specialist letter saying it would be detrimental and dangerous to put her in a 6-bedded bay and expose her to the stimuli of the light and the noise and the hustle-bustle continually. She got very, very little rest and very, very little sleep. And even an ordinary patient would find that very hard to cope with if they had the illness Karen had. She had people using hair dryers right by her, very noisy nebulizer machines, people talking continually, all the things that are wrong. The ward consultant was very understanding. He wanted to get her moved, and her actual consultant wanted to get her moved into a room. But the hierarchy, they just dig their heels in, and they absolutely refuse. And Karen was suffering terribly, and it's made the ME worse. It's complete lack of compassion.
Yeah.
And ignoring what's in front of their eyes. Her medical observations were wrong. You know, pulse rate 125, sky-high blood pressure. You know, there was actual evidence, as well as looking at her, there was evidence that she was suffering. She was unable to introduce her peg feeding that goes into her stomach and into her bowel. That's a very difficult process to reintroduce that. Her tube has been blocked. They managed to unblock it, but she needed some sort of environment to help her. She desperately needed help. She just wasn't given it.
And Heather, now with the government intervening and saying to the NHS, you need to stop blaming the patients for being ill, and there needs to be some re-education, both in medical schools and I suppose on the job as well. That's come from the top. Does that give you any hope?
It does give me some hope, but it's got to percolate throughout the whole NHS, not just the doctors, the nursing staff as well. And the nursing staff have got the power over the allocation for the side rooms. And they were going to throw me out the hospital, physically throw me out, because they didn't want me to stay with Karen, despite her pleading that she needed me for communication, advocacy, care and support, emotional and physical care. We were holding hands. She was clasping my hand, and we had several people telling me I had to leave. And that sort of sums up the lack of compassion.
Yes.
Also, can I just say, they're just not providing the IV fluids and the feed that Karen needs from the community. There's a great big gap in provision. People with ME need to stay at home whenever possible. And we've illustrated very clearly that in the hospital, they are made worse anyway, because the whole environment of hospital makes them worse.
Okay.
But
Heather,
if they're going to be treated so badly like this, you know, she needs the feed at home, the IV feeding and the IV fluids to try and keep her at home so she doesn't die of dehydration and malnutrition.
Of course not. Heather, we're going to have to leave it there because the line is not great, but I think we got, hopefully, the kind of main thrust of your point. Sean O'Neill, just back quickly to you. You know, she makes a good point, because, yes, it's the government. It is, you can't get any higher than that, and they're telling the NHS to kind of get their house in order, but it does have to percolate down to everyone. And that's, I don't know, will that take a generation to change that kind of attitude that exists within some people?
Personally, I think it'll take a long time. This is an interim report. I think people with ME have been asked, and their carers have been asked to contribute to the government's thinking on that, and it's important they keep that momentum that has started with this report. That must be kept going. But yes, it will take a long time. Like I said earlier, I think it's the next generation of medics who will change things. There's not enough research, there's not enough understanding, and there really isn't, as Karen said, there just isn't sufficient compassion, because people don't believe the patients. They have been told, the doctors and the medics have been told for years that this is a psychiatric or a psychological condition. It can be cured by exercise and CBT. And frankly, that's insulting to people who are really suffering physically, terribly, an awful, debilitating illness.
Yes. Sean, thank you. That's Sean O'Neill, senior writer for The Times. We also heard from Heather Gordon, the mother of Karen Gordon. She was talking about specific hospital and the care. And we have a statement from Eastbourne District General Hospital. Patients with ME have a range of needs that often require complex multidisciplinary care. All treatment that we provide to patients who have ME is as closely in line with NICE guidance as possible. and ensuring that they have the best clinical care and experience the best possible clinical outcomes remain our highest priority. We continue to work to provide care that will deliver the best outcome for our patient.
It is amazing, isn't it, when you hear those stories, that the government feels sufficiently confident to say, here is an interim plan that means this disease needs to be recognised in this way, and yet the medical consensus isn't there for practicing doctors, because as Sean says, they've been told something different. Isn't it? It seems to me that this seems to be such a disputed area at one level, and yet the government feels it's completely straightforward, and people like Karen and Sean would say, of course it's straightforward, but why is it taking so long to get to this point, if it is as straightforward as that?
I don't know. I mean, I remember we were talking about all the stuff around birth and how there's that feeling of we know best, we're the experts, and you're the kind of customers or the patients or whatever it might be. And I mean, maybe again, everyone's different. Everyone has a different experience of people within the NHS within particular kind of chronic conditions or whatever, but maybe it's got something to do with that.
It's the problem with care in the NHS sometimes as well, is that it's very good at curing things where there's a test and there's a cure, but it's that sort of long-term chronic care where we often hear stories of it falling over.